Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the eMLB Insider Podcast. This is your host, AnjouPays, alongside my co-host, JR. How are you doing today, JR?
Great. It's awesome to be back with you here on the podcast, Andrew.
Yeah, unfortunately, due to a lot of both of us having schedules that don't always align, it's been a bit since we've done a podcast. We definitely have missed recording these. These are always so much fun to do, so much fun to talk about the eMLB and where we are in the season. And it is good to be back. And we have we'll call this one our trade deadline special, even though it's been a couple of weeks. We're in middle of August in terms of the sim, but we never got a chance to talk about the trades that happened at the trade deadline. We were trying to do it earlier, but our schedules, like I said, didn't align. So this podcast is going to be focused mainly on those. We're not gonna touch on all of them because there were a ton of trades that went down, and we would be here for what you guys don't want to watch a 2 or 3 hour podcast, do you? But so we're going to talk about the trades that went down that we think were the most impactful, the ones that caused the most stir, and the most impact on the potential playoff race. And speaking of the playoff race, goodness gracious, it is heating up. We were planning out this episode, and we commented on the fact that there are so many teams that are within just a couple of games of each other at the top of their divisions and within the wild card race. This is setting up to be one of the most exciting playoff stretches in eMLB history because we have potential races in all but maybe two of the divisions. The two divisions in my mind saying the AL Central is pretty well in hand with Detroit and the NL West right now is in hand with San Diego, but all of the other divisions have fights on their hands. So, speaking of those, let's go ahead and talk through this. So, right now, AL East, you have Baltimore, the first team to hit 70 wins on the back of their, I believe it was 16 game winning streak. Was that correct? 16 game?
It was an amazing stretch there. I believe you might be right on the 16 games, but they just went on just an incredible run.
Yeah, they couldn't quite reach the real life Cardinals run of 17 last year, but no, no, it's definitely they are the hottest team in baseball right now. They are the only team that have 70 wins, and on the back of that 16 game winning streak, which funnily enough was ended by the team with the worst record in eMLB in Oakland, which I thought was a little funny, but hey, 16 games in a row, even if you do lose to Oakland in that to end the winning streak, that is still extremely impressive. But you still have Tampa Bay and Boston hanging right with them at 3.5 and 4 games back because at the time they started the streak, they were in third behind both those teams. They flipped the script. They're now in the lead, but Tampa Bay and Boston are still both within striking distance. We mentioned Detroit kind of running away with the AL Central, and probably the biggest reason for that is you see how Baltimore had a huge streak of wins to go after the All Star break and around the trade deadline. Chicago kind of did the opposite.
Yeah, it was really a shame to see the White Sox go through such a tough stretch there. For the longest time during that first half of the season, it felt like they were really scratching and clawing to stay there within striking distance of Detroit, and you felt like maybe they were one really good stretch of baseball away from being right there in the thick of the division race with them and going toe to toe. But unfortunately, they ran into a rough patch, and as you mentioned at the start here, that division's pretty well salted away for the Tigers at this point.
Yeah, because the Tigers are literally the only team in that division above 500 at this point, with a 10.5 game lead over both Chicago and Minnesota. So you have to think Detroit is going to be able to cruise to an AL Central Division title, but in the AL West, we're not cruising. Texas Rangers are 1 game up on the Los Angeles Angels. Houston Astros still technically have an outside chance. They are 6.5 back, which is not insurmountable, but it is going to be a hefty amount to overcome. But Rangers and Angels, they're fighting for that top spot. But not only that, those two teams are both whoever doesn't win that division is going to have to fight with Tampa Bay and Boston and Baltimore for the two wild card spots. So not only do we have close division races, but it's right now it's down to 3 teams in the wild card in as the current standings currently are Tampa Bay, Boston, and Los Angeles with again Houston 6.5 back of that as well.
Yeah, and a team like Houston and in a lot of other normal years you'd look at them and say, maybe they would still have a pretty decent shot at a wild card with the record they have and the team they've got, even if they're not able to overcome the two teams up ahead of them. But that would even be probably a longer shot at this point, them catching one of the wild card spots. So we'll get to the trades, of course, later, but I think that's why you saw Houston look to do maybe a little selling at the deadline, just to realizing kind of the state that they were in and maybe seeing if they could cash in some resources there, because the odds of them making a push for the playoffs pretty slim.
Yeah, injuries definitely hurt them this year, especially to center fielder Sammy Isla. So you expect them to be in contention next year, but this year's a little bit of a disappointment, a little bit of a down year, but I'm expecting them to bounce back, but without one of their key components, which again we'll touch on later. Moving over to the NL, in the NL East, this is probably the two Eastern divisions are probably my two favorite ones to watch.
Wild. It's wild, baby.
With the Mets are now in front of the NL East with a strong 7-3 out of their last 10, including a 3-game winning streak. They swept the Padres in their last series. A game and a half up on the Washington Nationals, 3 games up on the Philadelphia Phillies. And goodness gracious, this division, I think all 3 of those teams have led the division at some point this season.
Yeah, this division shows absolutely no signs of settling down anytime soon. Just when you felt like the season started out with the Phillies being a real surprise, they were in the lead for quite a while, and then Washington, who has really been kind of the class of that division for a couple of seasons. You saw them kind of bubble to the top and felt like, okay, maybe this is them kind of putting their stamp on things, and they're gonna get this division again. And then all of a sudden the Mets come out of nowhere. Pete Alonso really has come alive finally. He's clubbing homers, he's hitting well here in August, and all of a sudden here we are with this 50 games or so to go, and I still couldn't begin to tell you who's going to win that division.
Yeah, they've also got a Cy Young candidate, Estevan Florial, in their rotation as well, although they kind of use him as like, was it a follower, I think is how they use him mostly, or they started using him as a starter more?
I think they've started using him as a starter more, but yeah, at the beginning of the year, he was really kind of in that follower role where initially I think he didn't even necessarily qualify for the voting
for the All-Star voting
for the All-Star game.
Yeah,
and that was rectified, but
he definitely deserved it.
Yeah, Escalona's been tremendous, and he's the kind of guy that could really power them down the stretch.
I completely did the wrong New York player. Estevan Florial is an outfielder for the Yankees. What am I thinking? Thank you for correcting me. I don't know why Florial was on my mind. I guess I don't know. But moving on to the NL Central, probably the surprise of the season, I would say right now, are the Chicago Cubs, currently leading the NL Central, a game and a half over the Cardinals. They just split a 4-game series 2-2, and I am not happy because, and I've already told JR about this. That's why he's laughing. In that series, in Game 2, after the Cardinals took Game 1, Cardinals had a 1-run lead in the bottom of the 9th over the Cubs, and the Cubs scored 2 runs on a single error that caused the winning run to score. And if it wasn't for that 2-run error, the Cardinals would have taken 3 out of 4. So I'm frustrated about that, but hey, it's baseball. It happens. But the Cubs, man, they came out of nowhere. Where did they come from?
Yeah. As you said, I think we all kind of went into the season thinking, okay, the Cubs are one of those teams that has a lot of young talent that they're going to give some time to. They had brought in a couple of veteran players, to maybe kind of help out and be leaders on that team. But man, they have really stepped up those young guys. And obviously, it's not often you get a boost in the middle of the season from a number 1 draft pick, but Danny Smith Jr. has immediately stepped into that outfield and just crushed it.
Yeah, this is a generational type player in Danny Smith Jr. For him to jump straight to the major leagues coming out of the draft in the middle of a wild NL Central division race where he could have a big say in whether or not the Cubs or the Cardinals win the division. It's not to be overlooked, and it frustrates the heck out of me. honestly, seeing Danny Smith Jr. about to be added to the Cubs kind of made me want to add Ronald Acuna more, because I felt like I needed to make a move to match or at least compete with what the Cubs were going to be adding in Danny Smith Jr.
It's like a big trade deadline move. I mean, it's
It
like
really
adding a
is, but they didn't have to give
superstar.
anything up.
Right. Yeah, it's like adding a big superstar at the trade deadline. I think when we were talking about this earlier offline, I'm just amazed. He's 19 games in and he's got 2.5 WAR already.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just unbelievable.
Now, here's the question though: who's had the better start to their career, Danny Smith Jr. or Mark Diggs of Washington? Because Mark Diggs started out on a tear as well.
Yeah, what he if you remember, we touched on him on the podcast weeks back, where I believe it was his first month in the big leagues. He was the rookie of the month, and if not for a absolutely crazy month by Fernando Tatis, his first month in the big leagues, he would have been the player of the month.
I still say he should have been player of the month. He had, in my mind, he had better numbers than Tatis, but that wasn't my decision.
Yeah.
But man, it's just amazing to see the impact of these young superstars reaching the big leagues, and how much of an impact they're having on their teams. Now, the Nationals, as we mentioned earlier, they need other people to step up. They need Soto to get back in the Hall of Fame form. They need their bullpen to step up, because with the way some of the other players are performing, you'd think they'd be at the top of their division. But we'll see. We'll see what happens down the stretch.
I really think they're going to regret not having addressed that bullpen at the deadline. There were a lot of really good relief options out there that they could have added to help out there. I know, the GM, Pirate has had some other things going on that he's had to take care of in his personal life, and obviously that all takes precedent first. But I think if they could have added a couple arms to that bullpen, that would have been a huge help for them down the stretch here.
Yeah, and hanging into the NL Central though, back to that division, the Brewers are still only 4 games back, so they're still hanging in there as well. That is also going to be a great race to watch between 3 different teams. That is 3 division out of the 6 is a 3-team race. That is going to be some exciting baseball. And we're not even talking wild card here. We're talking division championships between 3 teams. And that's going to be some exciting baseball. NL West, a little bit out of reach for the Arizona Diamondbacks. They're 7 back of the Padres at this point. But, I mean, we've seen crazier things. Arizona's definitely got the talent. They could turn it around. Padres could start going. Like, right now, they just got swept by the Mets, so who knows what's going to happen there. But wild card race for the NL. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 teams all within wild card striking distance. The furthest team back is Arizona. They're 4 games back of the Brewers for the 2nd spot, and then the Cardinals are 2.5 above the Brewers. So, looking at these division standings, both AL and NL, literally, if you have an above 500 record, you still have a chance to make the playoffs. That's where we're sitting right now, because you see Houston is above 500 at 6.5, and then Arizona is just above 500 with 4 games back of their respective wildcard spots. Those are both within striking distance. So if you have more wins than losses, you have a chance to make the playoffs, and that is crazy to think about. As we're in the middle of August, we're almost in the home stretch when we hit September. This is going to be some exciting baseball to watch.
It's going to be exciting, and as we've seen, a lot of these division races have cycled through different teams throughout the year. You've had teams hop one another, to where even once we get to the playoffs, no matter who gets in, it's really not going to be that much out of the realm of possibility for any of these teams to make an impact, because they have been so closely packed. I know we've pretty consistently had the Tigers near the top of our power rankings throughout the season, and I think we both feel like they have a really good roster. But again, so many of these other teams have gone on runs and stretches where you just looked at them and thought, oh man, these guys are unbeatable. And then 2 weeks later, another team comes and does the exact same thing.
Yep. And looking at these divisions and trying to think back through how the season has progressed, the AL East, the NL East, the NL Central, and I believe the AL West might fit into this. All 3 of them have had 3 different teams be at the top of their division consistently.
I believe so.
The only exceptions to that rule would be the AL Central, who's pretty much been the Tigers all season, and the NL West, who started out with the Rockies, but then the Padres took over and haven't let that up. So,
Yeah,
but the other
Padres have
4
held on.
all have had 3 different teams hit that top spot and hold on to it for at least a little bit, and not just 1 or 2 games. I believe Houston had it for a little bit at the beginning of the season, if I'm not wrong.
I think so. And if not, there were times where they were only maybe a game or a half game back at certain points. So I mean, they've been right there at different points throughout the year.
So now this brings up a question in my mind, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, JR. The real life MLB, with the new collective bargaining agreement, has expanded their playoffs to 12 teams. Do you think that we might potentially be seeing expanded playoffs in the eMLB's future with these crazy playoff races that we've got going right now?
I think it's definitely a possibility. Obviously, in our sim universe, there are considerations that we don't have to worry about that MLB has to consider. So, for us, it's no big deal to kind of blow through, an extra round of playoffs to get folks in there. Me personally, I still like the idea of make it to the playoffs a smaller group. So I would be one that would be a little hesitant to do that, but
yeah,
it because again, even in the situation like now, you have a lot of teams who have to fight to get in there, and so people are still alive for those spots. But yeah, I think it's definitely a possibility. I wouldn't be surprised if somebody tosses it out there as a suggestion that we talk about this offseason.
So here are my thoughts on it. And if you follow me on Twitter, you might have seen me tweet this out. For the NHL and NBA, I'm talking real life at this point. They both have 82 game seasons, but they have 16 teams make the playoffs, and each of the playoff rounds are 7-game series. Baseball plays 162 games, but their playoff series, as it is now, is decided with 3-game series, 5-game series, and then 2 7-game series. So my question is, if you have a season that lasts that long, why are you making it so few games to get through a playoff round? Like, why not make every round a full 7-game series? Because you're playing 162 games to have your season. And this is one of the things that bothered me about the wild card up until this season is that you play 162 games to make the playoff, and your season was decided by 1 game. That would frustrate the heck out of me. Like as my Cardinals last year lost on a walk-off home run to the Dodgers, where we were matching them pitch for pitch all game, and to lose our season on 1 swing without even having a chance to come back and play a couple more games after 162, that's frustrating. So in my mind, I feel like I agree with you in terms of the number of the playoff field, that it shouldn't be very large, but in terms of the number of games in each round, I think more game series, like 7-game series, shows which team is better in the long run, because it's not a 1-game fluke that, or like a couple of strokes of luck. Like, in order to win a 7-game series based on luck, you have to have a lot of things go your way. So I think 7-game series makes it more which team is the better team and which one's better set up to win a long set of games. But again, this is just my opinion. It might not even happen in eMLB, but it's definitely an interesting conversation to talk about.
Yeah, for sure. It could go a lot of ways.
All right, well, look forward to some exciting baseball as we finish out August and look to September, because, like I said, both wildcard races have a bunch of teams within. Let's see, there's 4 teams within 6.5 in the AL, 5 teams within 4 of a wildcard spot in the NL, and 3 division races that are definitely between 3 teams, and another 4th that could be between 3 teams if Houston starts stepping up and winning some games. So this could be one of the most exciting playoff run stretches that you could ever see in any league. So we're definitely looking forward to that. But having an impact on those playoff races, we had a few trades, and when I say a few, I mean a lot. We had a lot of trades go through at the deadline. And also a couple weeks leading into the deadline. So we've picked out a few that we think are some of the most impactful trades that we are going to discuss. We don't have the time to discuss every single little trade, so we're not going to. So let's go to the trade log and player trade log. As everyone's watching me suffer to go through this. Okay, first trade we're going to talk about. It happened the week before the trade deadline, but it involved my team. It was between the Cardinals and the Yankees. The Cardinals received reliever Corey Knebel and sent over prospects shortstop Brady House, pitcher Albert Hernandez, and pitcher John Baldwin. So before I say anything about my thought process behind this trade, I want to hear an outsider's perspective on this trade in JR. What did you think about this trade?
So my initial thought when this came over was I was a little bit surprised at how much you gave up to get Knebel. Just looking at him as a relief option, giving up a pretty solid shortstop prospect in Brady House and a couple of decent starting pitching prospects. But having thought about it a little bit more since then, the fact that you have him signed through 2026, so you have another season out of him at not a bad price. I mean, 11 million for an elite reliever. I mean, that's nothing too out of the norm. Guy that can really be a lockdown at the end of the bullpen. And you're in a position where you've got some depth, especially in the middle infield with younger guys at the major league level and also in the minors. So taking the hit of a Brady House, I think your farm system could withstand that pretty easily. But also just again, looking at the squad, you're in a position where you're trying to make a run at a World Series, and so if you can add an elite reliever like Knebel, who he's been elite. I mean, let's just be honest. Look at his numbers. He's been an elite guy without giving up any of your key prospects. Even if you give up a little bit in quantity, I think that's a pretty good deal. And again, for the Yankees, they're taking a guy who, when they're in a rebuild, they can flip a reliever for, a couple solid starting pitching prospects and a good young shortstop prospect. I think it made sense all around.
Yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head in terms of my reasoning as I accidentally show everyone what my scout had him rated at. Whoops. It's okay. OSA values Knebel more than my scout does, but that doesn't mean I didn't want to add him. So your thought process was correct. And here was where I was in the middle of July looking at places I needed to upgrade. I knew I needed to upgrade my offense, but at that time I wasn't getting any traction on any of my talks. So I was like, you know what? All right, I need to make an ad somewhere. Where can I improve? And I looked at my bullpen, who at that time was solid. But when you looked at the individual pieces, there were only 3 members of my bullpen that had a WAR above 0. And that was Leclerc, my closer, and then Zapuki and Loaisiga. They all had WARs over 1. Leclerc at the time had over a 2. And so I'm like, I don't know if that's sustainable for the stretch run. I want to add one more piece to this to add another, like, to add more security to my bullpen. Not only that, Loaisiga's contract is up at the end of this season, and he's asking, and this is just a little bit of insight, he's asking quite a bit in terms of an extension. And honestly, he's been a great reliever, so I can understand what he's asking for, but honestly, it might be a little bit too steep. So I add Knebel, who's got another year of control. Even if I lose Loaisiga, I still got Knebel to fill that spot. So those are my two. That was my two main points. I needed to shore up my bullpen for the playoff run, but also have a guy that can have control in case I don't re-sign Loaisiga. And yeah, I gave up quite a bit for it, but I've got Tony Sawyer at shortstop, who is 22 years old. He's not leaving that spot anytime soon. He's got elite defense. He's hitting decently well. I don't see him moving out of that spot in a while. Second base, I've got Gunnar Henderson, who's playing well. I've also got another middle infield prospect in Tony Courtney, who's almost ready for the majors, who is 20 years old at this point. I've got 3 young guys for my middle infield, which means I don't know how soon House would even be able to hit the majors, much less get some playing time. And so I saw House as someone I could move to get someone that could impact now. And then a minor trade I made later, I added a couple more middle infield prospects, dealing from my outfield surplus. So I still got back a couple of middle infield prospects. They aren't the level that House was, but it still gives me that depth back that I lost. And then with pitching, I have quite a few pitching prospects that are around the level of Hernandez and Baldwin, so it wasn't too big of a deal to let them go. So I felt the deal was fair overall. New York got some good talent in House and Hernandez and Baldwin, and I got a lights out closer who so far in 8 appearances has only allowed a single run and only 1 walk. So that's pretty darn good. He's already accumulated half the WAR that he had when he was on the Yankees up until that point. So he's definitely doing it for me. Definitely been that presence that I've needed in the back end of the rotation, back end of the bullpen to spell Loaisiga, Leclerc, and Sapuki to get some of that pressure off of them. So now I've got a 4-headed monster in the back of my bullpen. So
yeah, I think it worked all around because again, the 2 starting pitching prospects aren't guys that right now look like they're going to be front of the rotation guys or anything like that. One of them could develop that way, but again, I think it was more of a talent depth move for the Yankees, and
yeah,
the good thing is that way, even if you were to sign Loaisiga, you really don't have the commitment to Knable for 1 more year. So
that's true as well.
there's no long-term commitment there for him.
That is also true. All right, moving on to the next deal, we have Seattle and Baltimore making a swap where we have Omari Hardiman going to Seattle while Baltimore got starting pitcher Casey Mize. So what do you think about this deal?
I was a little bit surprised to see Seattle being so willing to give up on Casey Mize, just knowing what kind of issues they've had finding starting pitching. I mean, he's going to be arbitration eligible again at the end of the season, but even this year he's only making 1.1 million. And they do get a guy back in Hardiman who has a great arm, but he's really going to have to improve that changeup of his that to be that that third pitch to really be somebody that can sustain himself as a starting pitcher. Otherwise, you're looking at a guy who, although potentially could be a really good reliever, he's it's going to be hard for him to be a starter with a weak third pitch like that. So I was a little bit surprised to see that move. I think it made a lot of sense for Baltimore as they're continuing to kind of bulk up the rotation behind Jim Reed and Ethan Knight. They had picked up Connor Siebold earlier in the year, so they're adding some depth there. So I could see where they were coming from with kind of a cheap addition there.
Yeah, and for me, it looks like Mize is one of those players that was outperforming his expectations. He was on track. Right now, he's on track to have the best season of his career so far. He's projected to end with a 2.3 WAR. And at the time he was traded, he had a 1.5 WAR, which almost already matched what he had the year before at 1.9 throughout the entire season. So I feel like even though his quote unquote ratings may not have been the highest, I still think Seattle could have gotten a little bit more out of Mize just based on performance alone. So I think this was a good move for Baltimore to pick up. He hasn't pitched as well in Baltimore as he was pitching in Seattle. So you have to wonder if he's going to if moving to this new team has kind of thrown him off a bit. So we'll have to see if he comes back to the level he was pitching at earlier in the season with Seattle. But in terms of the deal, I think Baltimore got a really good deal if he can get back to the production he was doing in Seattle. All right, so moving on from that one, let's see. What was the next one on my list? It was this one. It is Atlanta moving on from closer AJ Minter and getting back Brandon Nunn, a reliever that's actually now in the majors, and shortstop Alex Freeland, who is now in AAA.
Yeah, Mentor was somebody that Braves GM Aiden Pearson made it pretty clear that he was going to try to move him at the deadline. He had kind of identified him and Luke Jackson and a couple other guys that he really wanted to move. So no real surprise, obviously, that the Mentor was going somewhere. And Tom, the GM of the Angels, seemingly always likes to really kind of bulk up his bullpen at the deadline and heading into the stretch and into the playoffs. He really is somebody that believes in kind of having a deep bullpen for that playoff portion. And they did have some kind of similar to your situation, had some shortstop depth to deal from with with Freeland included there. So now again, Minter hadn't been all that great with the Braves. His numbers didn't look all that great. So obviously, the Angels will be hoping he kind of turns that around. But it's really no surprise to see that they wanted to kind of fortify the bullpen a little bit.
Yeah, you mentioned that LA is known for adding bullpen arms at the deadline. Last year it was Tanner Scott that they added at the deadline. They have a lot of left-handed relievers in that bullpen, which is interesting. But yeah, and I'll be honest, Minter was someone I looked at one point when I was looking for relievers. I ultimately settled on Knebel, but what worried me about Minter was his performance this year, and he is 31 years old. His salary is at 10 million. I just felt like I got better value out of Knebel. Now I had to give up more to get Knebel than
Right.
Minter, and that performance definitely had a factor in on that. So far in LA, he is doing okay. Let's just call it a little around league average, with a 4.15 ERA, but a 3.70 FIP. So not horrible, not great. We'll see if he can have more of an impact down stretch run. I don't think it's a bad ad, and I think it was a good move on both sides, with Atlanta struggling this season, looking to get some prospects back that could not only did he get prospects back, he got prospects back that could contribute right away. These aren't prospects that he's going to have to wait long about. In fact, one of them is already in the bullpen in the majors, and the other one is just a step away at AAA with the shortstop. So I think the Braves right now, they're not rebuilding, they're reloading. And we'll talk about there are two more moves the Braves made that reached our quote unquote major trades list that we're going to discuss. And they're definitely making some moves that they're looking to compete again next year, my opinion. So moving on from Minter, adding a couple prospects that are almost MLB ready definitely fits that narrative. All right, moving on from that, what's next on my list? We got Miami making a very interesting move as they add Aaron Judge to their lineup with a hefty salary, but they also moved a hefty salary in return back to Toronto, who got Adam Eaton and prospect second baseman Raul Campos. What's going on here? Two teams that are near the bottom of their divisions, moving very expensive pieces, and not only that, but Miami retained 15% of, or no, did Toronto retain 15%? Right? Is that
right? Yeah, Toronto did. Yeah,
I read it the wrong way. Toronto retained 15% of the contract from Aaron Judge, which, let's see, how many years left does he have on that? This is just the last season. So
yeah.
the contract's coming off the books this season, and then for Eaton has a vesting option that requires 550 plate appearances. So how many does he have right now? He has...
That ain't going to happen.
221. Yeah, that's more than likely not going to happen. So both of these contracts are expiring. So retaining the 15% is not a big deal. That might have been just to make the finances work so that it fit within their budgets.
Yeah.
So why this deal?
I think it comes down to Miami wanting to sell some tickets. You swap a couple bad contracts, but one of them pretty high profile guy and Aaron Judge, somebody that is pretty popular. So sell some tickets, sell some jerseys. Eddie down there in Miami, he's not opposed to getting a little creative and making a fun trade just to spice things up a little bit.
You have to think of him as the fans GM, getting the players that the fans want to see, because Judge, and keep in mind, people, this is not the real life MLB. This is 2025, so a few years into the future. Aaron Judge is not the player that he is currently in MLB. He is batting 184 with a OPS of 771, so he's still hitting. Oh no, that's just with Miami. His OPS is, where is it? 725. So he's hit 30. He's projected to hit 36 home runs this season. So he's hitting a lot of home runs. He's just not doing much else otherwise.
Yeah.
he's a classic all or nothing guy. But I think I agree with you. I think it's Toronto gets a prospect back, not necessarily someone you kind of expect to be like a top line prospect, just kind of like a middling prospect. Move contracts. Both of them were expiring at the end of the season anyway, so it's not like it really hurts a team either way. Who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe Miami re-signs Judge to something cheaper to keep that ticket sales flowing. Who knows? But it was just interesting to see a name like Judge and how much money was exchanged between hands in these two contracts between two of the two teams that are 15 and 17 games out respectively of their division. It was definitely an interesting trade that made some noise in an otherwise crazy trade deadline with the top team. So I thought that one was interesting.
Yeah, it was worth giving a look at.
Yeah, for sure. All right, and then the next trade we're going back to Atlanta. Back to Atlanta. We've got, where is it? There it is. Atlanta and Cleveland made a trade where Atlanta got Jake Bauers, a very talented left fielder, and Cleveland got a plethora of outfielders in Brian Warren, Andrew O'Quinn, community created player, and Brian Goodwin. Now, I'm just going to point out off the top, if this was still the last GM, this trade would have never happened because Andrew O'Quinn is the community created player of the former GM of the Braves. So this trade would have never happened if he was still the GM. But we have a new GM, and he doesn't have that emotional attachment to that CCP. Figured he can move on from him. So Bauers moving to Atlanta, not the season that he has had in the past. Prior 2 seasons, he's had WAR above 4. This year, he's only projected to be about at a 2.4, and so his production has declined a little bit. Do you think that Atlanta got a fair deal in this? Do you think they gave up too much?
You know, I was a little bit surprised at what they gave up to get him. Again, you know, for a little bit looking at the Atlanta deals through this deadline, I was having a little bit of a problem kind of figuring out what Aiden's plan was and kind of where he was going, because some deals felt like they were to the future, some deals felt like they were a little more toward the present. You know, I think to your point earlier, you know, he was kind of setting himself up to maybe move some pieces around while still, you know, being ready to compete next year. So, you know, a guy like ours, you know, is a deal that, you know, probably is made because he ends up trading Acuna, which we'll talk about later.
Spoilers.
I don't know, I don't know if that trade happens if he doesn't trade Acuna. You know, that's one of those, you know, things that may or may not have still happened, but you know, gives up some outfielders. You know, Goodwin's kind of just a, you know, a veteran guy, but you know, O'Quinn, again, you mentioned he's Shamrock's CCP. We don't really know how active Shamrock's is going to be, so
Yeah.
you know that may not have the kind of you know, potential for superstar status that some other CCPs have. So, you know, that's one of those little bit of a wild cards in terms of how much he gave up. But you know, if he's looking to have some added offense there with knowing what he was potentially going to give up in another deal, you know, it's not a bad deal for him as long as Bauers can kind of recapture that form.
Now, Aiden and Sadir can correct me if I'm wrong in our Discord or in the comments. I believe that this trade took place after the 3-team trade that we're about to discuss. So it makes more sense when you put it into that context, considering as you've already spoiled that the Braves ended up giving up Acuna. So that does make sense as Bauers slides into left field as the replacement for Acuna. Honestly, I don't think it was too crazy of a give. They gave up a 34-year-old outfielder that didn't really have a future because Atlanta's stacked at outfield, to be fair, and which also probably made more sense for them to move a couple of these outfield prospects because they've got a young outfield that they can build around, and adding Bauers just locks in that left field spot. So I think it makes sense for both teams. Indians definitely on the rebuild, getting value back for Bauers, and Atlanta moving some pieces that maybe don't have in their future plans for someone that can contribute right away. So I think it was fair across the board. Now we'll have to see if Bauers can get back to the form that he had in the past couple seasons in Cleveland. Because if he keeps performing at this current level, maybe the value of the trade swings back more to the Indians. But at the potential that Bauers could play at, I think it's fair. All right, now when I saw this next trade, I was like, this is the trade that made so much sense and could this was like, other than the 3-team trade, this is the trade I think would have had the most impact on the playoff race. And that is Boston getting Noah Syndergaard from the Houston Astros in exchange for the number 24 prospect in all of baseball, Josh Robbins, as well as the number 187 prospect and center fielder, Ethan Price. And we've talked before on the podcast about how the Boston offense is carrying them. They made a trade earlier for who was the pitcher from the Pirates that they traded for that I can't remember off the top of my head?
Mike Kennedy.
Kennedy, yeah. They traded for a pitcher because they saw that as a need. And we mentioned on an earlier podcast that if Boston wants to stay competitive, they might need to add another rotation piece. And boy, did they add another rotation piece in Syndergaard. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I feel like if Billy hadn't made a trade for a big time starting pitcher, it would have been a disservice to the team that he's got going right now, because that was such a obvious and glaring need to bring in somebody to help address that pitching staff. He and I had briefly talked a little bit about Lance McCullers from the Reds potentially going to the Red Sox, but didn't really get too far down the line, so it's not anything that we really got deep on. But I think absolutely he had to make a trade for somebody. Thor is a guy, Syndergaard, who has been a stud for Houston for for their runs these last couple seasons after they got him from the Mets. He kind of had a rough 2024, but it looked like he had bounced back this year. So I think that's what made him attractive there to Boston, was it looked like he was kind of getting himself back in order and kind of being that front of the rotation starter again. He hasn't necessarily done great for the Red Sox yet, but I think they needed somebody that could give that rotation a boost.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, like this last season, he had a lot of bad luck in 2024. Like his FIP was over a point lower than his actual ERA ended up being. And so I think that contributed to a little bit of a lower performance. His walk rate did spike, however. 2023 was obviously one of his best seasons ever. And I don't think he's definitely not pitching up to that standard. So my question is, do you think Boston gave up too much to get Syndergaard? Were they giving up what they gave up, thinking that they would get the Syndergaard of 2023 and not the Syndergaard of right now?
It's interesting because I've seen some conflicting reports on how good a lot of people think Josh Robbins is. I mean, he's definitely highly rated from BNN, from the OSA ratings. My scouts ratings were much lower on him from my standpoint. So maybe Billy's scout wasn't quite as high on him as either, and he felt like he could kind of sell him high a little bit, being that highly ranked of a prospect. But also I think there's sometimes where you kind of just got to pull the trigger and run with your opportunity to shine, and knowing how great that offense is. I think sometimes you just got to cash in a prospect like that for a chance at a difference-making pitcher. Whether Syndergaard is that for them, debatable. But sometimes you just got to pull the trigger, and I don't blame Billy for doing that.
Yeah, and Houston, to their credit, got back some pretty darn good prospects in return. Josh Robbins, just based on OSA rating, is rated at a 75 out of a possible 80 potential. Now, he's still very early on in his career. Still developing at high A ball. But you have to think he's definitely got some good value coming back in Robbins and Price. So I definitely think it made sense from the Houston side. Not only that, you dropped $27 million from your payroll as well. So that could open up space to make some moves this offseason for another reload, because Houston is still technically in striking distance for the playoffs this year. But you get some of your injuries back, you get some production back that maybe people have lost this season. You add a couple more pieces now that you've opened up $27.4 million in budget room. They could make some moves this offseason to get them right back into the playoff picture next year for sure. All right. The moment you guys have all been waiting for. We've teased it a couple times. A lot of people have already known this went down. The 3-team trade to end all 3-team trades, and maybe to end all trades, period. It's a little bit weird in terms of how it was organized in OOTP because we had to split it up into 3 different moves. But essentially, here's what went down. The Atlanta Braves traded Ronald Acuna Jr. to the Cardinals. The Cardinals sent back to the Braves outfielder Ron Carney and first base prospect Kellum Clark. Cardinals also sent pitching prospect Philip Hopfess and first baseman Matt Wallner to Cleveland, while Cleveland sent to Atlanta third baseman Jose Ramirez and reliever Luis Acevedo, pitching prospect reliever. And then Atlanta also sent back to Cleveland catcher Bobby M. Cox. Hopefully you guys all caught up with that. There is a summary of it in our Discord that has it all laid out. There was a lot of moving parts. We actually did an interview on that 3-team trade if you want to go back and check that out, where we actually talked through how this trade came together. But I'm interested to hear, because we didn't really get a chance to hear JR's perspective. You guys heard my perspective if you go back and watch that. So I'm not going to really comment on it this time. You can go back and watch our interview on that where I talked about what my thought process was, why I made this trade. I mean, I'm adding Ronald Acuna Jr. Come on. But in terms of what I gave up to get him, how the trade came together. But I'm interested from an outsider's perspective, JR. What did you think about this trade?
So my first thought, and probably still what my thought is now, is I love the trade for Cleveland. I love Cleveland being able to, Jose Ramirez has been a great player for them. He's still, a decent player, but I definitely think he's shown that he's a little bit on the decline and has a big contract remaining for the next few seasons.
Mm-hmm.
So for them to be able to move him and get a solid young hitter like Wallner in return, along with a good catching prospect in Bobby Cox, along with a wild card of an arm in Hopfess. I really like that trade for the Indians, just from the standpoint of the flexibility that'll give them and being able to kind of move on from that contract and kind of see what's next for them. They're going to have to make a lot of changes to be a contender in that AL Central. From your standpoint with the Cardinals, again, you're getting the best player in the deal, who also is a young player with a lot ahead of him. Before the trade, while he was with Atlanta, his numbers were a little bit down this year, from the past couple seasons. But again, he's still a young guy with all kinds of tools and talent. To me, the best player in the deal. Wallner hadn't exactly, done what you were looking for from him, and the guys that you gave up. I mean, you're giving up Carney, but that's partly because you're putting Acuna in the lineup.
Yep.
There's other guys you can replace him with. And again, as we've discussed, I know Aiden really liked the first base prospect Clark, but you can find a lot of guys like that. So again, from your perspective, totally get it. I think it makes a lot of sense. And again, you're going with a superstar player to try to make a run for a World Series. The part I didn't understand a little bit, again, from Aiden's perspective, of it just felt like a little bit of an awkward move, not necessarily knowing what his plan was moving forward. At the deadline.
I think. Go ahead and finish your thought. Sorry.
Well, I was just gonna say, seeing some of his other moves, he definitely was in a system trying to move some guys at the deadline, kind of shave some guys off there while still, bringing some guys in that will compete over the next couple seasons. And I know, he's very confident about where his financial situation is and everything with Ramirez and being able to absorb that contract. But man, if in a couple seasons he's really in the tank a little bit from a production standpoint, I don't care if you've got the money to waste or not, but to spend, potentially, I think it's, $30+ million on a guy that could have some rough production, that could put you in a tough spot. And, to me, they gave up, the best player in the deal in Acuna, and they gave up, a pretty good catching prospect in Bobby Cox that, even if he felt like he was down the depth chart from his perspective on his team, maybe could have been used in another deal for something else.
Yeah, honestly, for me, that was the biggest question mark was the contract that he had to take on in Ramirez. Like, there's no doubt that the player is fantastic, but he is 32. He's going to be making 37 million for potentially 5 more seasons after this one,
Yeah.
depending on when and if he opts out of his contract, because he's got the last 3 years of the deal are all player opt outs. So that's potentially a lot of money on the books for Ramirez. And I discussed this in our interview. I was looking at both Acuna and Ramirez because I wasn't sure. I was mainly going for Acuna because A, it fit my lineup better because he could slot into right field, which is where I've kind of had a revolving door all season. And B, he had a much better contract for a younger player. And I was honestly surprised that Aiden wanted to get Ramirez back. As basically he told when we were talking about this, he wanted to make the move to get Ramirez to make losing Acuna a lesser blow, which honestly makes sense. But I don't know about the price you're going to have to pay Ramirez over those years. So we'll see if it works out for them. But I definitely think it fits the narrative of reloading rather than rebuilding. So hopefully Atlanta can step back up next season and play well. They're kind of too far out at this point, I think, to make any run at the playoffs. So we'll see how Ramirez does in future seasons in Atlanta. But I agree with your assessment about Cleveland getting back a really good value. Essentially, what happened was, you can think about it in this simple way. I traded essentially Carney, Wallner, Hopfest, and Clark to Atlanta for Acuna, and then he flipped Wallner and Hopfest along with Cox to Cleveland for Ramirez and Acevedo. So that's essentially how you can think of the 3-team trade. That's essentially what happened. So I do agree. I think Cleveland got fantastic value out of the deal. They're definitely in a rebuild mode. You move on from the $37 million contract. You also move on from the Jake Bauers contract as well, as we talked about in the earlier trade. They've got a lot of capital on the books, and they still have Lindor as the core of their lineup. So they didn't have to give up everybody. So they could make some moves in the offseason, and whether in free agency or maybe even making more trades to get younger. Cleveland should be back to form pretty soon. Maybe not next season, but in the next couple seasons, they're going to be back to form with these moves. So,
yeah, I definitely think it frees them up and gives them plenty of options as they look ahead. And I think Sadie has some ideas in mind, and he knows that Detroit's going to be there for the long haul, and some of those other teams there have a lot of young talent too. So I think this just really gives him options along with the value.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, after all that, we are done talking trades, and we're not going to talk about injuries. We're not going to talk about other news because honestly, we just spent a lot of time talking about these trades. There were more trades that went through. You can, if you're not in the Discord yet, you can join the Discord. Kamish has written up blurbs about everything, so make sure you check those out if you haven't done so. But now it is time to move on. Maybe it's everyone's favorite segment. I don't know. It's probably my favorite segment. Maybe you guys at home can tell us if it's your favorite segment or not. But it's power ranking time, and we're going to do another clean slate because it has been a while since we've done a power ranking. So we're not going to do the whole how much they've moved because it's been like a month's worth of games, I think, since the last time we did the power rankings. And there would be a lot of movement, especially with who we have near the top of ours. But we're going to be starting out here with JR. Who do you have at number 10?
So at number 10, I've got the New York Mets, who have climbed to the top of the NL East. Again, as we talked about, it's been a lot of different teams making hay at the top of that division. But right now we're in a spot where the Mets are really on a roll. 12-4 in the month of August, so they're really getting hot at the right time. Pete Alonso getting his power stroke back and really providing some offense in the middle of that order. So This was I think the first time I've had them on my top 10, and looking forward to seeing what they do the rest of the way.
All right. My number 10, I've got the Boston Red Sox. And I could have put them higher. Um, this honestly, this is probably the hardest power ranking I've had to figure out because of how close all these teams are. I'll comment on how close they are once we get up near the top, but uh, honestly, Boston could be anywhere from 6, 7 to 10. But I've slotted them at number 10 just because compared to their AL East rivals, they are playing a little bit worse. They were leading the division at one point recently, but now they've dropped back to third. It's not like they've been playing horribly. They're under 500 since the All-Star break. They're 14 and 15, so they're on a little bit of a downswing, especially when you compare it to the other AL East teams. So that's why I've got them slotted here at number 10. We'll still have to see if Syndergaard can help turn that team around, because if their offense starts slacking a little bit, it might be a little bit more of a fall for the Red Sox. Number 9, I've got the NL West leading San Diego Padres. The main reason I put them here at number 9 is because they just came off a sweep. They got swept by the New York Mets, and that is not a strong case to be higher on the rankings. They are also only 12 and 16 since the All-Star break. They're on a little bit of a downturn. The fortunate thing is that they've been so far ahead of the rest of the teams in their division that they're not being threatened as of now. But if they keep this slide and Arizona starts winning some games, we could end up with another very interesting division race. Outside of, they also had a major injury happen. What was it? Yuna Kim just got injured with a broken collarbone. So that could be a very impactful injury. So you hope that San Diego stops this slide. They are on a little bit of a downturn recently, but that's why I've got them there at number 9.
Yeah, and I've got the LA Angels at number 9 on my end. That again, that AL West, they're nipping right at the heels of the Rangers. Despite the fact that they've got Mike Trout out for a few weeks. He just got injured not too long ago. He's got a pretty bad sprained ankle. It's supposed to keep him out, I think, another 3 to 4 weeks. So he might return right before the end of the season. Give them a little boost there, but. We mentioned how much Tom likes his bullpen. They've got the number 1 bullpen in the AL in terms of ERA, with a lot of guys there at the back end, and we've seen Asa Lacy and Greg Briggs, kind of the young arms in the rotation, really hold up well as Ohtani and Jacob deGrom have kind of been a little bit up and down.
All right, what do you have at number 8?
So at number 8, I've still got the Pirates there. I did put them ahead of the Mets, despite.
You just said the Pirates.
Oh, sorry, the Padres. Yeah. Oh, sorry, Cody. Not so. No, not going to happen, buddy.
Ooh.
But I know they've been a little bit kind of, I don't know, stuck in neutral. I think just after having kind of run out a little bit with that division, and also with losing Unicam, as you mentioned here recently. They also lost their first baseman Luis Ramirez for a little bit. So they've had a couple injuries pop up. Sometimes it's tough, I think, for teams that have a big lead, to keep kind of their A game going, when they don't have somebody right on their heels. So looking at the overall, I still think they're a little bit higher there, but I think they're going to really need to kind of kick it in here toward the end of the season to be ready for the playoffs.
All right. So my number 8, I've got the Mets, who you mentioned earlier. And the reason why I put the Mets a little bit higher on my rankings as opposed to number 10, yeah, they may have, and just a little bit of a spoiler, the Mets have the worst record on the top 10, but the reason why I didn't list them at number 10 is because since the All-Star break, they are 18 and 11, which is, I think it's second best behind the Orioles. Yeah, it's the second best record in all of baseball since the All-Star break, behind the Orioles. And that is extremely impressive. This run has helped them jump from third to first in the NL East. And they are, like I said, they just swept the division leading Padres, so they're beating the high contending teams. And they're just on a hot streak right now. It'll just be a question of, can they keep this up? Like we've been mentioning, the NL East has kind of been shuffling around all season. But if their strength is in their pitching, led by Cy Young candidate John-Fran Escalona, who I messed up earlier. I called him Estevan Florial for whatever reason.
He forgives you.
I'll sing his praises now. I say right now he is the leading candidate for Cy Young. He has got an under 2 ERA at 1.97, and he is just dominating at 11. Also has an 11-4 record. He is leading that pitching staff, and they have their ERA in terms of NL rankings is second in the NL. They've allowed the third fewest runs in the NL. And if their hitting can keep up with their pitching, which is honestly going to be a common theme, as you'll see in my next one, they can go very far. Speaking of hitting, needing to keep up with their pitching, my number 7, my St. Louis Cardinals. People are probably sick of me talking about it, and I'm sorry. I probably talk way more than I should, but that's the strength of the Cardinals right now is their pitching staff. And the weakness of their team is their hitting. And if their hitting does not pick up, that's the reason why I traded for Acuna, was to pick up the hitting. He's done great. Other players on the team, not so much. So led by another potential Cy Young candidate, and even if he doesn't get Cy Young, he's making a very strong case for Rookie of the Year. Jeremy Frank has been a revelation for my team. I am very pleased at how Jeremy Frank's been doing. 13-4 record with a 2.6 ERA. And honestly, I'm shocked at how well he's pitching. I did not think he was going to pitch this well, and I hope he can keep that up because we need him to. And because the offense, just plain and simple, is just not doing enough right now. They had a chance, as I mentioned earlier, we had a chance to jump the Cubs in the standings after they recently took it over, but took two out of 4. Fortunately, we didn't lose 3 out of 4. We stayed even with where we were before the series, but we need to start winning some series if we're going to overtake the Cubs again, because the Cubs are really scary right now.
Yeah. And I have, I've got your Cardinals at number 7 too, so we're both kind of aligned there. I think, to your point about the offense, now that you got Acuna, I think the potential is there for you to have, maybe, the best outfield in the league with Acuna joining with Joe Adell and Dominic Aguilera and
AAA, baby.
AAA. And so, if those guys can pick it up, I think, those guys as a trio could give you enough offense to carry you through if the pitching holds up. So I think, those are the guys that you're really going to count on. Those are your stars. You really want those guys to step up here down the stretch and try to carry that team.
And honestly, it's Adell that needs to step up. I wrote an article about this in the Discord. Adell's production compared to last year has fallen off a cliff. Aguilera is playing about as well as he did last year. Acuna is playing better in St. Louis than he was in Atlanta, so he's stepping up. And now, to be fair, it's only been a couple of weeks with St. Louis, but still, Adell has seen his production drop off a cliff. He was a 40 home run player last year. He hasn't even hit 20 yet, and we're in mid-late August. If Adell starts playing the way he did last year, that's going to turn the team around. I think Adell is going to be the key for the Cardinals. If he turns his offensive season around, that's going to be what lights the spark and drives us forward. Also, Houston Astros had killer bees. The Cardinals have AAA. It's fine.
So then at number 6, I do have the Cubs there, just ahead of your Cards. We talked about them a lot earlier, but again, they're a team on the rise who could really go up these charts. I think it's going to be interesting to watch. We've talked a lot about their young bats and their offense. They're kind of like how Boston was before they added Syndergaard, where they've got a starting rotation that's kind of a bunch of okay guys. They're kind of doing enough to keep the team in the game and let the offense go win it. So it'll be interesting as they start to face some of these more elite teams, if they do make it in the playoffs and they're facing elite starting pitching. Is their offense still going to be able to produce enough to make up for okay pitching on their end?
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely, like I mentioned earlier, they're definitely the surprise of the of the league right now, leading the NL Central, because people expected them to have maybe 1 or 2 more years before they were considered to be competing. But number six for me, I've got the LA Angels, who you had down at number 9, and it's kind of the same reason why I had the Mets higher than you did. Is that since the All-Star break, the Angels have one of the best records in baseball. They are where are they? They are at 17-11 since the All-Star break, just one win fewer than the Mets that I mentioned earlier. And while they are on a little bit of a slide recently, they have positioned themselves only one game back of the Rangers at this point. They are playing well. The injury to Trout, yeah, that obviously is going to hurt, but they are riding some extremely effective bats right now, as they are a top 5 in most offensive categories in the AL, and pitching that is, for the most part, is just outside the top 5. But you mentioned their bullpen is elite, and they added Minter to that mix just to make it even better. And they've got very strong case for repeating as World Series. Now they still have some work to do because, like I mentioned, they're not in first right now. But I mean, if you can looking at their bullpen, they don't have a defined closer. Their bullpen is so good that they're rotating their closing duties between Tanner Scott, Seranthony Dominguez, and probably AJ Minter's in the mix as well. Like, they are set up to be able to handle anything that the bullpen needs to have thrown at them. And it's just a matter of, can the starting pitching give them enough innings to not wear out the bullpen, and can the offense keep up the production? But right now I've got them at number 6 because I think they're just playing really good baseball right now. And then at number 5, just one spot above where you had them, I have the Chicago Cubs. Like I've mentioned, the surprise of the season at this point. They're a team that isn't doing something that's elite at any level, but they are well above average across the board. Their batting is, for the most part, in the top 5 in the NL. Their pitching is, for the most part, in the top 5 in the NL. They have the balance that teams like my Cardinals and the Mets don't have right now. And that is why they're doing so well. It's because they're able to play well from both sides of the team. They can pitch well and they can bat well. They're not doing it. They're not the best in the league at it, but because of that combination of doing above average in both areas, that's what's projecting them forward. And obviously, adding someone like Danny Smith Jr. into that lineup, who is batting .446 with 10 home runs and 16 RBIs in just the short amount of time he's been up, that just adds another X factor. Looking at their lineup, though, I feel like I should have added more left-handed pitching because 8 out of their 9 players are left-handed hitters. So I'm like, man, maybe I should have gone after AJ Minter. No, I'm good with Knebel. Jeremy Frank is left-handed though, so that gives me an advantage. In fact, I think the game that Jeremy Frank got the win in the one game that we played against that lineup. Yeah, the first game of the series, Jeremy Frank pitched against that mostly left-handed lineup and got the win for us. So I'll take that moving forward. But regardless, the Cubs are definitely playing better than the Cardinals right now. They have a better record since the All-Star break. They're playing but well on both sides of the ball, and adding Danny Smith Jr. as that X factor could push them to the division title, as much as I hate to say it.
Yeah, and so my 5 spot is where we have probably the biggest difference on a team. So I've got the Red Sox at number 5. You know, for me, they definitely have not been playing as well as of late. As we'll get to, the Orioles have been on a huge streak, and so they've kind of zoomed past into the lead spot there. But I do feel like with Kennedy, they acquired as pitching well from the starting rotation perspective. Syndergaard, I still feel is gonna help that starting rotation out. And then the top to bottom, that lineup is still a killer. So I still overall, looking at them, still see them as likely a top 5 team. So still have them in that 5 spot. And then at number 4, I've got the Rays. They're just a tick above the Red Sox at this point. I think we're still kind of waiting for them maybe to go on a real big run at some point. They did make a small move at the deadline to get Bobby Wall. kind of help add a little bit to the bullpen. Again, Charles is another one of those guys that likes to have some talented relievers there. They've been playing pretty well in August, 11-5 to kind of stay within striking range of the Orioles, with the streak they've been on. So, are they going to catch the Orioles down the stretch? Maybe, but I think they're still in a good spot wild card wise to potentially get in and make some hay in the playoffs.
Yeah, I've also got the Rays at number 4, and kind of along the same lines as the Chicago Cubs. They're good on both sides of the ball, but the difference between them and the Cubs is that they have the fewest runs allowed in the AL, so they are elite at that level. They've also got the highest. They've also got the best FIP and the best pitching WAR from that perspective. So if you can allow very few runs combined with an offense that is borderline top 5 in the AL, that's a recipe for success. Now, they are, like you said, they're not performing as well as the Orioles, but I mean, like, come on, that's 16 straight wins. They're still, you can't disregard that the Rays have done really well recently, and that's why they're number 4. Honestly, they're still playing really well. It's just Baltimore had an astronomical run to jump them to the top of the division. So you can't discount the Rays. They're not out of it by any means. They are definitely playing well. They are in this eMLB. They are a perennial playoff team, and I expect them to still make the playoffs with the way that they're playing. And then at number 3 for me, I have the Texas Rangers, who are sitting in first in the AL West, and with them, they did dip a little. They did have a small slide. When was that slide? I think it was July. Was it the beginning of July? Well, okay. They maybe not as big of a slide as I thought, but regardless, they are on a pretty good streak. Recently, they had a 5-game winning streak over Colorado, 3 games against Colorado, 2 against Detroit. They're still playing really well. The Angels, while they have played a little bit better, Texas already was playing well to the point where they didn't let up that lead, so they didn't get to the point where they were giving up their NL West or AL West lead. So they are playing very well. Another team that's balanced across the boards, leaning towards pitching. They are top 5 in most pitching categories in the AL, borderline top 5 in hitting in the NL, and you always have to account for the speed of this lineup. As a team, they have 128 stolen bases, and that is a lot of players that you are getting into scoring position and providing more scoring opportunities, which is why they are top 5 in the AL in runs scored. So this is a team that relies on that speed. This is a team that relies on their defense as well as their first in defensive efficiency, which backs up their solid pitching. This is a very well-balanced team. They may not hit for the best power. They are almost at the bottom in terms of home runs. They're 14th in the AL in home runs, but they're getting people on base. They're getting them into scoring opportunities. They're a small ball team. It reminds me of my Cardinals in the 80s, like the Whitey Herzog era of baseball, where you get them on, get them over, get them in. That's what they're doing. They're getting them on. They're getting them over without having to sacrifice an out either. They're getting them the second by stealing. And that is something you don't see a lot of in today's baseball, and you have to give a lot of credit for them doing it because they're doing it well right now.
Yeah, and I have the Rangers at 3 also. To your point, their bad stretch of baseball is playing 500 baseball in July and August. And that's so if you have to follow up a really hot May and June with maybe a month and a half to this point of 500 ball, and that's kind of allowed the Angels to creep back up there within a game. But it wouldn't surprise me at all for to see the Rangers turn it back on again. Like you said, very balanced team from top to bottom. One of those really well put together rosters from Jamie Thurman from the GM. So, I definitely see them as a team to watch. And then at number 2, I don't think any surprise. I've got the Tigers there. Again, as we mentioned earlier, the White Sox really kind of fell off and allowed the Tigers really to kind of salt away that AL Central division, which again, I think, we all at the beginning of the season looked at them as the favorite there, but the White Sox were making that tough on them for a little while. But now, the Tigers really kind of have their their eyes set on finishing out the season strong and getting ready for the postseason. And again, a really well put together roster from top to bottom. With a lot of stars there, a lot of balance. I think they're gonna really be looking for some of their starting pitching to really come up big as they get into the postseason. Where they might potentially have to match up with a team like Baltimore that has a couple of top starters, team like Texas that has some top notch starting pitching. Even to your point, the Rays have some really top notch pitching. So it could be a matter of how well their pitching matches up with some of the other elite teams.
Yeah, I've also got Detroit at number 2, and honestly, this is the team that probably has this is the team that I will probably guarantee a lock to make the playoffs. At this point, they're 10.5 up. No one else in their division is above 500. They are playing some great baseball, top 5 across the board in most categories for both offense and defense. Kind of a little along the same lines of Texas, though. They don't have the power numbers, but they're getting people on. They're getting them. They're scoring them. They're not doing it with the stolen base. They're just hitting the crap out of the ball, just not over the fence. But their defense is elite. They are the only team that's better in efficiency is the Texas Rangers, as I mentioned, but they are first in zone rating, and they have also had the least number of errors. Their pitching staff has also got the most strikeouts in the league. And if you can keep people from not even putting the ball in play, that gives a better chance for your defense to shine. If people can't even put the ball in play, there's no chance for them to score. And putting up first in the AL in strikeout numbers is definitely carrying this team, as well as the great defense behind them when they do make contact. It's just it's a recipe for success. Either you strike out or you hit it into a great defense, and it's working for them. And then number 1, we all saw it coming. The team that is on freaking fire right now, the Baltimore Orioles, number 1 in both of our power rankings, the first team and the only team to hit the 70-win plateau. What is going on with this team? Where did this come from? This is the team that we were talking about the first podcast of the year. We were talking about our 2 big surprises at the beginning of the season were how poorly the Pirates and the Orioles are doing. And all of a sudden, the Orioles have the best record in baseball.
Yeah, the Orioles have just been on an incredible run. I mean, we talked about the lengthy winning streak. They're 13-3 in August. I mean, just on an incredible run. You've got Ethan Knight and Jim Reed, 1-2 in the rotation, probably 1-2 in the Cy Young running right now in the AL, depending on, what order you want to put them in. And looking like an awfully, awfully dangerous team come playoff time when you're going to have to face those 2 guys at the head of a playoff series and face a team that, has an offense that is looking stacked right now, with Alex Verdugo having just an amazing year, Nick Spence, Buster Bluth, the Michael Busch acquisition off waivers a season ago. He's turned into a real great hitter at first. I mean, this team right now looks like it's hitting on all cylinders at the right time.
Yeah, and what's interesting is you look at their lineup. They figured out a way to get Michael Busch and Brandon Belt in the same lineup. They have Michael Busch playing second. You see that?
Yeah.
That is
I know it.
Wild, because
it's incredible.
He's not known for his defense at second. In fact, let me look at his defensive stats at second base. It's rough. He's got a negative 5.1 zone rating and an efficiency of 855. That is poor defense. But
when you have Ethan Knight and Jim Reed striking guys out.
Yeah, if you have the starter ERA is best in the AL. Their fielding independent pitching is third in the AL, and they might not be striking people out, but they're getting the outs. But their strategy of sacrificing defense for offense is working because they are first in on-base percentage, first in OPS, first in batting WAR, first in weighted on-base average, third in home runs, third in runs scored, and second in batting average. This is an offense that is carrying them. And when you have someone hitting 325 with 15 home runs, you figure out a way to get him in the lineup. And that's what they're doing right now. And Alex Verdugo putting up insane numbers. He's batting 360 with 18 home runs and 57 RBIs. Those are your 1-2 guys in your lineup. You've got guys. Let me take a look at their on base percentage. Bush is getting on 414 on base percentage. Verdugo 424. When the first two guys in your lineup are getting on base over 40% of the time, that puts a lot of pressure on the opposing teams to keep those runs from scoring. That is dangerous baseball right there. When you've got Bush, Verdugo atop your lineup, getting on base 40% of the time to set up for players like Brandon Belt, Nick Spence, Nate Lowe, Buster Bluth. That is scary.
Yeah, and remember at one point during the season, Brendan was possibly considering trading Buster Bluth, out of that lineup, and think, I mean, obviously they've had other guys perform too, but think about if he would have done that, does this run happen if that lineup gets jumbled around a little bit?
Now, the one thing I will say is the Orioles have probably had the most roller coaster season in the league. I'm looking at their win percentage over time, including the beginning of the season. I'm going to include that in here. They have 3 different times where they went on massive losing streaks across the season. The beginning of the season where they started poorly, in the middle of May or beginning of May, and at the end of June. They had 3 massive losing streaks. Now, this massive win streak has brought them back to the top of the league. But is another losing streak coming? Do you think that'll happen again?
I think the fact that they've addressed some of the other spots in the rotation helps, mitigate that from happening. Bringing in a Casey Mize, bringing in a Connor Siebold to help, behind Reed and Ethan Knight. I think that helps give them a little bit more consistency from where, Matty McClendon really kind of struggled for him there. And, I think those guys, veteran guys in those spots can kind of help keep that from happening.
Absolutely. And I'm noticing that right now they are listed as a 6-man rotation, which I think is interesting. If I was, and this is just from my perspective, if I was them, I'd be wanting Knight and Reed to make sure that they're pitching as much as possible. So I don't know how much they're utilizing the 6-man rotation, but maybe it's just to give Knight and Reed a little bit of a break because they're being used so much. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm like you. I would want to get them as many starts as possible. Look for off days, as a chance to kind of, maybe skip the 5th guy and, keep those guys on their regular rest, because, every win's going to count. Again, the Red Sox and Rays, have been there all year. I mean, they're not going anywhere. They're not gonna fade. So the Orioles are going to have to keep winning to keep hold of that spot.
Yeah, but there's no denying they are currently the best team in baseball, as both of us have them listed number 1. Not only that, we have the same top 4. And all of them are AL teams. In fact, you've got 5 teams. Your top 5 are all AL teams. So does that say that we are leaning towards an AL team winning the World Series?
I think the best teams are in the AL, but again, only one of them makes it to the World Series and one NL team makes it there. So it's going to be all about matchups.
This is true. But as I alluded to earlier, there's something I want to point out about our top 10. Disregarding the Orioles with over 70 wins and the Mets at 64, everyone else on this list has either 66, 67, or 68 wins. That's 8 out of the 10 teams. That's why this was the hardest power ranking for me to figure out, because everyone is around the same win level. Now, obviously, the losses are a little bit more diverse, but in terms of the number of wins, that's a difference of 2 between 8 teams. And that is why this is going to be one of the most exciting stretches of baseball you will ever see when we hit September, if the teams keep playing around this same level. Now, will a team break out? Will a team hit a massive losing streak and fall out? Anything is possible at this point, because we've seen roller coaster rides like the Orioles. We've seen teams underperform. We've seen teams overperform. And I just can't wait to see what happens next.
Anything can happen down the stretch, Andrew.
That's why you play the games, and that's what baseball does. You got to play the games, and anything can happen in baseball. I just repeated myself, but I don't care because I'm emphasizing it. Well, that is going to do it for this week's episode of the eMLB Insider Podcast. Thank you guys so much for watching. We always enjoy recording these. Keep your eye out for more interview podcasts as well, as we are trying to get in as many GMs as possible that have reached out and wanting to get on our interview segment. We do have one that is going to be released around the same time as this podcast, and we've got another one planned out. So keep an eye out for those as well. Those are always great conversations with some other people around the league, just getting their insights on their teams as well as the league as a whole. So make sure if you haven't checked out those interviews, go back and watch those. Go back and watch past episodes of the podcast as well. And hopefully our schedules will align better where we can keep recording these, because we absolutely love recording these and are disappointed when we are unable to do so. We have a lot of fun here. I hope you guys enjoy watching. And until the next episode, we will see you guys later.